Welcome to the Growth Shift. I'm David Zylstra. Here's what I've learned after years in business. Every leader who's built something meaningful has a story about the moment they had to shift, when failure forced innovation, when change became opportunity, when they chose growth over comfort. On this show, we dive into those pivotal moments, the setbacks that became breakthroughs, the strategic shifts that accelerated growth, and the frameworks that turn obstacles into opportunities. Because here's the truth. In a world where change is the only constant, the leaders who thrive aren't the ones who avoid failure. They're the ones who've learned to shift strategically through it. So whether you're facing your own pivot point or just want to learn from someone who's been there, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. This episode is brought to you by Valentix. At Valentix, we help B2B coaches and consultants who are struggling with generating consistent, high-quality leads, automating their client onboarding processes, and scaling their operations without simply adding more hours or headcount. Most of the time, our clients come to us frustrated because they're bogged down in manual tasks and feel like they're missing out on the power of modern technology. But with the right strategy and AI-powered solutions, they're able to streamline their workflows, attract better opportunities, and achieve sustainable growth. If that sounds like you or someone you know, learn more at valentix.io. Now let's dive into today's episode. Today, I'm excited to welcome Zena Collins to the Growth Shift podcast. Zena is the founder of Emotional Math, an approach that helps individuals become emotionally intelligent business developers. With a rich background spanning from large corporations to professional service firms, and even experiencing burnout firsthand, Zena brings a unique and deeply human perspective to biz dev. She's not just about strategy. She's about understanding oneself and leveraging emotional intelligence for sustainable growth. Plus, she's actively exploring the intersection of AI and emotional intelligence through her AI learning circle. Zena, welcome to the Growth Shift.
Thank you so much, David. It's great to be here.
Now, Zena, you've had a pretty fascinating career journey, right? Working in multiple countries, working in diverse environments from small businesses to large corporations, and a whole lot more as well. Could you share a little bit about how these varied experiences, including living in countries across the world, led you to develop the emotional math approach and focus on emotional intelligence in business development instead of maybe just personalities?
Good question. So I think all of those experiences just remind you that there are so many ways to view the world and so many ways to experience the world. And the fact that our experiences and our context really shapes the way that we do things. And I had been trained in a number of different approaches to business development that were systematic approaches, that were, to project management approaches. But a number of them didn't really consider the emotions that people go through when they're on this journey to developing business, meeting new people, and the different experiences and contexts they have. That's a great question, David. Traveling around the world, working in different organizations, meeting people with a range of backgrounds really highlighted the fact that we all see the world through very different lenses. There could be two of us standing in the same park looking at the same view in front of us, and you ask me to describe it in 5 words, I may come up with different 5 words from the person standing next to me. And that idea just informed me that there isn't a cookie cutter approach to the way that people do business and the way that people are successful in business and the way that people build relationships, the way people see opportunities. So I've been trained in a lot of different business development methodologies, and the piece that was often missing was the human component. How do the way that people see and experience the world impact the way that they choose to do business? And how do the emotions that they feel and their ability to manage those emotions, particularly in unpleasant situations, because as I'm sure you know, going through the sales process isn't always pleasant. We've got to take the L's as much as the wins and be able to pick ourselves up and recover from that. And knowing what type of business developer you were in terms of your personality, whether you're somebody that sees opportunities, lots of opportunities, but doesn't necessarily always follow through, or somebody that is a deep set subject matter expert, but sometimes misses the opportunities because you're so entrenched in doing certain things in a particular way, all of those things made me really curious about, how could I potentially use the knowledge that I'm learning through studying the science of emotional intelligence through this Mesquite model, the knowledge I have about different ways that people experience the world, build relationships, and the different needs of different businesses could come together in a formula where you're looking at emotions and you're looking at strategy and you're looking at methodologies to come up with an equation to get better results based on who you are as an individual.
Really interesting. It almost sounds like it's an opposite approach of many of these traditional, relationship approaches, business development approaches, understanding other people instead of yourself, right? I mean, we could look at, how to win friends and influence people. I think everyone will know that book, focusing on those other people and how to get them to like you. Or you can look at books like, I don't know, maybe Surrounded by Idiots, right? Trying to understand these different personality types and using that to lead business development. But, people going through business, they experience, as you said, frustrations based off of themselves, their capacity to deal with emotions or manage the outreach or the systems or the processes and all of that as well. How is it that you really identified problems with this more traditional approach of understanding other people first instead of maybe just understanding yourself?
Well, the challenge is if you use those models to constantly try and adjust yourself to other people, it becomes unsustainable. And there's a point where there's a crack in your authenticity. You're wearing a mask, and after a while of wearing that mask for a long period of time, it becomes extremely exhausting. And this is where the burnout comes in, when you're trying to be something you're not, or you're trying to do stuff in a way that you've seen role model that isn't particularly aligned to who you are as a person. And so when I think about my own experience navigating spaces where often people didn't necessarily look like me or have the same experiences as me, it meant that trying to act in the way that other people were acting just wasn't authentic. And so people can tell. And so if you have something that people really want, they may just bypass that because they really want what you're trying to sell or what you're trying to give them. But if it's based on the relationship and it's based on the fact that people aren't going to buy the thing that you're trying to value to their lives in your mind, but you're essentially trying to sell to them in the first interaction, then it's important that you're building these relationships based on who you really are, at the same time as finding ways to build rapport with people who also may be different to you and not the same.
Now, again, this is a very atypical approach from what many traditional business gurus or business development gurus are teaching, right? It would seem to me that, maybe there was a revelation to you somewhere along the way of, this just isn't working, right? This isn't right. What was that moment? Was it a moment, or was it a series of events that led you to this realization and ultimately making a pivot that changed the rest of your career?
I think it's a series of revelations, but I think there is always a moment where it all comes together. And sometimes you've got to burn to learn, as they say. So your own experience of failing can sometimes be the biggest lessons that carry you on to future successes. And so being in an environment where it was high intensity, in a professional environment, in services environment, where there was a high delivery expectation. Sometimes there were expectations that were set that were above and beyond the capacity of the team.
Everyone loves those targets.
One of the biggest challenges was to be able to listen to the signs and reflect on the signs that your body often gives you, which is if you feel a sensation in your body of like your body tensing up, that's a sign, that's a message. How you respond to that based on whether you feel safe to respond to that message can often impact results that you get later on. So let me give you a clear example. So you're in a situation where there has been a deadline set to complete a piece of work. You know that deadline is unrealistic, but if you don't comply and complete the work to that deadline, you may be seen as incompetent, and that may impact your ability to get promotions and other opportunities. But your body is saying you've already worked 24 hours. There's a tension, you've got twittering in your eyes, your body is giving you signs that you are exhausted. But you choose not to listen to that because you are focused on being seen as competent, and you're being told that it's not safe for you to acknowledge that you're feeling these feelings in your body. And many of us will know that over time, continuing to do that, you may then have experiences where you are completely burnt out and your body says, regardless of what your brain is telling you you think you want to do, your body is not going to cooperate. So I had some of those experiences where I realized that if I don't connect my emotions and my feelings and the sensations I'm having and use that to facilitate the way I'm thinking about doing something, and then develop some compensatory strategies through being able to communicate, being able to create some preventative strategies where I'm able to identify the risk earlier on, then what's going to happen in various different ways is you're going to crash and burn. And so I was at the time also running an affinity network and observing this in other people who were trying to meet a certain standard based on expectations to perform in unreasonable situations. And as a result, it's like when you run a marathon and you see people race off at the beginning way too fast and you're pacing yourself and then you're thinking, oh, I'm going too slow. But you get to mile 15 and you see all those people that raced far ahead of you sitting on the sideline with the paramedics because they took off too fast. And so having the courage to, run your own race and recognize that, the successes in finding strategies to be able to run the marathon rather than to be seen as the person who's able to sprint off at the beginning becomes critical for you to sustain this journey of business development and life in general. So that was a bit of a long-winded way of explaining to you the point where I realized something needs to give and I need to have a different approach to this.
Mm-hmm. No, that's very insightful, and I love the analogy used of running a marathon, right? Because you have to focus on running your own race, right? Not just trying to compete with others who you might think are doing better than you, but realize where you're at, right? Because without that alignment of your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions, I think many people listening to this have experienced burnout in those situations as well. So I think it's just understanding yourself, understanding your strengths and your weaknesses, and being able to lean into those strengths, right? So that you do have that alignment with everything else in place as well. So that's really interesting. I'd love to learn a little bit more then specifically about what you're doing with emotional math. I mean, could you tell us a little bit more about what your core unique value proposition is, and how does it actually help clients become emotionally intelligent business developers?
So it's a combination of science and practical application. And I found out about what we call the Mesquite model, which is the Meyer-Salovey-Caruso emotional intelligence model, which they then developed into a test where you can actually test your emotional intelligence abilities, solving problems with emotions. So unlike some other emotional intelligence tests, this approach has some answers that are more right than wrong. And it's not a social emotional personality test. It's not testing whether you are an optimistic person or conscientious person. It's testing whether you understand the science of emotions and if you understand how to apply that information to then make decisions using the data that you get from emotions. And so my approach takes that science and first of all teaches people about something that we should have learned at school, like maths and English, to be able to have these fundamental skills to better navigate life, which we weren't. And so we teach a new language that people can use to have these aha moments when they're going through their process of developing their business development strategies, when they're thinking about their change management plans, because a lot of the times the missing piece that we miss out of these plans, where they fall down, is the people impact. And if you're not thinking about the impact that activities are having on how people feel, whether you're implementing a new technology system, whether you're trying to sell somebody a new product, if you're missing those cues, you will have barriers to achieving your success and not even realize that those barriers could have been solved by having a communication intervention, a coaching intervention, a training intervention. And so a lot of times people are looking at projects, change management programs, and they are thinking that it's something that is related to a tactical issue that is stopping the project from being successful. But actually what's happening is the people who are they're trying to get to do the thing have run out of capacity because the unpleasant emotions that they're feeling have not been acknowledged and not been addressed. And so people are checking out. So when we see these stats of 70% of change programs fail, or now we're seeing new numbers of AI programs, like 95% of AI transformation programs failing, it's the same problem. And the problem is the people challenge isn't being addressed. We're not looking at how are we helping people to have more emotional capacity to navigate change, especially when it's unpleasant.
It sounds like, a lot of people maybe in a lot of methods or approaches to change are failing simply because they're trying to put a square peg in a round hole, in a manner of speaking.
Exactly it. And that is really how the emotional mass piece came to, because I was like, there's one thing to get your results and understand, the level of your emotional intelligence abilities. But sometimes you have these emotional intelligence abilities, but you don't have the how of how to apply them effectively in situations. So the emotional mass was developed to give you the how, which was designed to the blueprint of who you are. So, for example, in the book that I've written called The Emotional Intelligence Business Developer, we talk about 4 different types of people: fire starters, grounders, oceans, and fresh air. And they all do things in various different ways. So we have lots of conversations now about neurodiversity, people's cultural backgrounds, social norms. Those all impact the way that you move throughout the world. So of course they're going to also impact the way that you do business. And so we can look at those through like a fun model without, putting people into rigid boxes of the fact that all of these are superpowers when they're used correctly. But just like the X-Men, you need to have a team of people with different skills in order to really get things achieved in an optimal way. Nobody is an island, and everybody needs somebody else to help to achieve the ultimate goal. So looking at it in that way is a fun way to think about the fact that when you're looking at people who do things differently, they just have different superpowers. And if you bring all of your superpowers together, you can actually make magic happen.
No, I love that, the focus on individual superpowers. Zena, could you maybe share a story or an example of a client that you've worked with to help their team, their biz dev team, start to recognize their own superpowers and the change that resulted?
Well, the most recent example, and this is a bit of an unconventional example, so I spent many years in professional services in business development roles, training people from different backgrounds to apply business development practices in a way that was unique to them. So for example, I worked with the Japanese business services team, and culturally the Japanese team have a particular way of doing business. And so the model that we had at the firm needed to be adjusted and adapted to their style of doing things. And once it was adapted, they were much more successful. And there's a number of different examples I could use, living and working in different countries and adapting a rigid model to the styles of individuals. But my favorite example of most recently is the AI Learning Circle that I work with. And it's become an incubator where people are identifying the different AI tools that are going to enable them to solve the problems that are important to them. And part of that process is also defined by the type of people they are. So we have a fire starter in the group, somebody who has lots of ideas, high energy, will start the party, will get the idea going, but doesn't necessarily have the energy and the structure to stay the course. They're not a great finisher. But what we have in the group are other people who are grounders, who have identified that this person is a great fire starter, has great ideas that they wouldn't be able to come up with, but they have the structure to help them and the subject matter expertise to help them to take that idea to the finish line. So just watching organically by creating this sort of psychologically safe learning circle where people can show up as themselves, you can start to see organically how people are recognizing each other's skills and gravitating to each other, saying, actually, I have a client who could do with that idea, and I can work with you to take you to the finish line and put all the technical pieces you need in place to make that possible. So my favorite example is the most current one, where I'm seeing the years of my experience of kind of what works and what doesn't come alive organically, and it almost feels like magic to watch it and see that people don't necessarily know the science behind it, but are actually getting the benefits of that being part of the way we structure the circle.
It sounds like you're almost, within the circle that you're mentioning, but also within the companies that you're working with, you're helping teams find a synergy within the team to lean on each other for their strengths and rely on them perhaps to fill some gaps that individuals might be experiencing as well. Is that common, actually working with teams, or have you noticed if that's common with other coaches and consultants, actually helping create synergy within teams instead of just trying to create, individual masters of biz dev within organizations?
I think that's the challenge sometimes, because we lean into creating rock stars. I had it was a prep call for a conversation I'll be having with the people that came up with the concept emotional intelligence in November, Peter Salovey and Jack Meyer and David Caruso, where we had a conversation around the challenge with rock stars in business and even in the academic world, where we don't see emotions as good or bad, it's all data. And as I mentioned, some people have emotional intelligence abilities, but they don't apply them. And sometimes it's because they're seen as the rock stars in their organizations. So that's for everybody else. Everybody else needs to use their emotional intelligence to manage their bad behavior, but they don't need to use it in order to be successful, because they've been recognized as the rock star, and it's just accepted that, that's how rock stars behave. So it's become increasingly important, and I must acknowledge the fact that I've come to this conclusion as well on my own journey and finding myself in situations where my skill level has been recognized as a specialist skill. And so there's been the opportunity to take advantage of that privilege. And so it's a constant process of having to have that self-awareness, to be like, what are your values? Who do you want to be to show up in this space? What's going to make the best team? What's going to create the best outcomes? To be able to have that awareness that actually you are the problem right now. You are the person who may have the emotional intelligence skills, but you're not using them. You're not applying them. And in doing that, you're not creating a safe space for other team members to be able to work cohesively with you in a collegiate way. So I think to your question, one of the skills that I've been told that I've been able to master is the gathering of people together and to create these teams. There's a book called The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker. It was gifted to me, and it was gifted to me because in spaces, particularly in creative spaces, one of the skills in my role as a producer in those spaces was being able to bring people together from different skill sets, different backgrounds, and be able to create a shared level of understanding and teaming in situations.
Okay, wow. It sounds like you have a pretty unique approach to what it is that you do and how you help your clients. And I think, a lot of the listeners of this show are maybe in a similar position. They feel they have something unique. They feel they can create great impact. But one of the biggest challenges, especially with a unique approach, is having other people recognize the value in it immediately, especially from a business development standpoint, instead of just, bunching you in with the rest of the noise. So, for the sake of our listeners, could you perhaps share a little bit about your strategy for, if you wanted to intentionally secure some really high value engagements that you could have such an impact with? What would be your approach or your strategy to actually acquire clients like that?
Often with areas which we have specialist skills or their specialist approach, it's I can show you better than I can tell you approach. So a lot of the times you will offer an opportunity for somebody to experience the coaching or the testing, or you'll invite them to an activation that you're doing so they can experience what you can't often put into words. And so a lot of the work I get is through referrals, through people having amazing experience, giving testimonials, and be able to provide examples of how the work I've done has created results over a period of time. Because a lot of the times you have the initial aha with the work I do, but the biggest value is potentially 3 months, 6 months, 12 months down the line, where things are operating more effectively. They've been able to implement some of the strategies and they're seeing results in terms of revenue, in terms of more cohesion within the team, in terms of people getting it, cultures changing. But that doesn't happen overnight, and this is why pipeline management is key. So having 3 times your pipeline, because the conversion cycle for the work they do could be 3 months, 6 months, 12 months.
Yeah, absolutely. And, pipeline management, definitely pivotal and essential as a business developer. I think a lot of successful coaches and consultants really rely on referrals to build that pipeline. But for those listeners who might be in those early stages, or, who might also be, let's say, stuck in that referral trap, we'll call it. It's a good trap to be in. It can be a good trap to be in, but it's also still a trap. How might you break out of the referral dependency to more systematically fill that pipeline?
So using technology, there are a number, you talk about some of the technology at the beginning of our conversation, and technology is the biggest enabler you can have if you are very clear about the system that you're designing it for. So one of the things that I've worked with clients on is thinking about, what are you trying to automate before you automate it? What are the workflows you're trying to optimize before you think about including the technology? But I think technology is a critical enabler to be able to not only get leads, but also manage those leads, and most importantly, follow up and maintain those relationships effectively.
Amazing. So just leaning on the technology to make things easier, right? For the pipeline development, the management, nurturing relationships, and all of these things as well, because we each have our own capacity, right? And by leveraging technology, you can grow beyond that capacity. Just before we jump into technology a little bit more, I'd love to learn a little bit more, or I'd love you to share a little bit more with the audience. We're in a pretty fast-paced environment and often uncertain business environment today, with so much that's out there: competitors, noise, market saturation in the coaching and consulting area. With all of these things considered and the impact that they have on individuals, what are some of the biggest emotional challenges you often see entrepreneurs and business developers facing?
So it's overwhelmed is one of the big experiences that I see. Not knowing how to prioritize. Everything becomes important when you are working on and in the business, particularly if you are a small business owner, which most people are, or a sole proprietor, which most of us are. And so being able to have mindfulness techniques and strategies to slow that process down, and again being able to effectively use technology to support you in that, is really critical. And this is why understanding what type of business developer you are then helps you to be able to think about, what's the right tech stack for me? What are the right technology tools that I need based on how I work? So for example, for me, I was at a place where I had a lot of technology tools, and then I shifted my business, and I shifted my business with all of those technology tools. But those technology tools were no longer applicable to this new business model. And so I spent a lot of time then having to sort of unpick the technology tools. And then as technology changed and some of it became AI enabled, you had multiple tools that were doing the same thing. So there needs to be also an audit of the way that you're working with your technology, as well as the way that you're doing your business. So just in the world we are today, I think that has become quite a challenge for business developers and businesses owners generally, in terms of knowing what technology tools are the right fit for what they're trying to achieve.
Interesting. So, if we're looking at it, and maybe this doesn't make sense, and my mind is just going somewhere that doesn't make sense, but if we look at the tech stack and the tools that entrepreneurs and business owners are using, and the emotional side of that as well, where is that crossover point? How do you see emotional intelligence playing a crucial role in effective implementation of technology and AI in a business?
It's all about your decision making. Let me break it down in really simple terms. So when we use the emotional mass model, we use a framework called S.U.M.S. See, understand, make, manage, and then sustain. And that's built off of the Mesquite model for emotional intelligence, which is around perceiving emotions, connecting emotions to facilitate your thinking, and to think about the way that you think about emotions, understanding the meaning behind emotions and the causes of those emotions, and then managing emotions in yourself and others. And so often when we're in situations where we are activated with unpleasant emotions of stress, it reduces our capacity to think. And so using these frameworks gives you almost like training wheels to slow down that thinking process, so you're not making reactionary decisions. So you see an advert that says, this is the latest tool, every other coach is using it, you need to use it. rather than clicking that buy now button, you may pause and then reflect on, actually, am I reacting because I just feel anxious that I've got to do something, or am I reacting because this is the right decision for my business? So being like, so what am I seeing? What am I experiencing? Now, slowing that process down, taking some deep breaths in terms of understanding what I need to make a better decision about what's triggering me to want to do this. Okay, I need to have a better system for managing my contacts and my leads because I'm becoming overwhelmed in my inbox and I'm not following up. Okay, I understand what's going on. So what decision do I make now? What's the right tool to be able to solve this problem? Okay, now I've got an understanding of the decision I can make to do that. How do I manage this? So how does this fit in my overall tech stack? Let me review my tech stack. What impact is that going to have financially in terms of my monthly subscriptions? Do I need to get rid of a subscription? Am I going to add this description? And then sustain. So how am I going to sustain this? How much learning do I need to onboard this new system? Do I have an assistant that can help me to manage this tool? Or is it something that's going to become another unwieldy tool in my tech stack? So that's just a very simple example. And just having those frameworks is really just used to slow down your thinking and give you an opportunity to breathe between each thought process. So I'm a yoga practitioner as well. So some of these principles also come from me having to identify compensatory strategies when I haven't been using my emotional intelligence in the best way and making quick decisions, which still happens today. Like, it's an ongoing life journey. But if you have the framework, then you've got more opportunity to make decisions better decisions more often.
I see. That makes a lot of sense. So understanding yourself as an individual and your emotions, but also your emotional responses to outside forces, understanding yourself and analyzing those forces, those outside influencers, whether it be an ad saying, this is the tech everyone's using, you need it now, and being able to sit down and look at these individually and say, does this align with where I'm at, what I need, and my capacity emotionally and, with business towards it as well. That's really neat.
It's much hard, and the reason we call it a hard ability is because it's much harder to do than you would think. So this is why it's very different from the other emotional intelligence tests that you sometimes see out there, because it's not a self-assessment. It is based on science. It's based on identifying how are you actually processing these emotions? How are you actually using them? And what are the results you're getting as a result of using them or not using them effectively?
With this said, I'd love to dive a little bit deeper into the tech and the AI side of things. From your perspective, what do you think is the most exciting potential of AI for business development? And then conversely, what's the biggest emotional challenge that it presents as well?
The possibility that you could get time back. So we started this conversation talking about the fact that sometimes engagements were built where you were expected to deliver more than you would have capacity to in the time that you were asked to deliver this project. With AI enabled tools, and if they're used correctly, used emotionally intelligently, you could potentially claim a lot of your time back based on the fact that activities that took you 3 hours could now take you 30 minutes. So the question is, what are you going to do with that time? And so part of the emotional intelligence activity, I guess, would be to be able to not fill that time with more stuff, to actually take the benefit of saying, well, as a human being, in order to recharge my battery with this extra hour, I can go for a walk. I can go for a walk in the park. I can call my mother. I can speak to someone I haven't spoken to for a long time. I can do all of the relationship stuff that sometimes we don't have time to do, which is extremely invaluable for creating long-term sustainable relationships, not just in business, but personally as well. So I think that's what excites me the most, is the fact that we could potentially get time back to be able to be more human. The biggest challenge is the fact, and I've experienced this when I first dived into AI, there's so many different tools. It's exciting. I have a bit of a fire starter personality, so I was just like, oh, bright lights, all these fancy tools, You could make all the things that I wish I could have done as a creative person in my youth, but now I can be a filmmaker. Now I can be a recording artist. I could do all these things. So it becomes another distraction like social media. So being able to use the emotional maths method, apply emotional intelligence to how you are considering how to use these tools to solve the problems that you are solving for businesses, and also to automate things in your life that reduce your day-to-day admin that can make you focus on more high value added tasks, becomes the challenge in terms of making sure you're finding the balance in doing that.
Zena, thank you so much for sharing your profound insights with us today. To wrap up, what is one piece of advice that you'd offer to our audience about harnessing their own emotional intelligence for sustainable business growth and navigating today's complex landscape?
I would say, I mean, maybe I would say this, but I would say if you can do the test to get an insight to your level of emotional intelligence ability, and also recognize that these are not soft skills. These are really hard skills to apply, and being able to add time in your business to be able to use them is a skill of mastery. So rather than, as we talked about the marathon early on in the conversation, pace yourself, make sure you're baking in wellness techniques into your daily practice, even if that's stepping away from the computer for 5 minutes and doing some deep breathing, factoring in time to go for a walk. Those things seem like they're soft, but actually they can be the difference between you being extremely successful or you burning out and not being able to sustain the progress that you've made in your business for a extended amount of time.
Very insightful. Zena, for any of our audience who might like to connect with you online to perhaps continue the conversation, what would be the best way to find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Zena Collins, and I write a newsletter called Emotional Maths, which you can follow on LinkedIn. I also work within a company called Grand Strategy, which is at www.grandstrategy.llc, where we do different coaching, assessments, training, and emotional intelligence consulting solutions. So you can also find me there.
Thanks again for joining us on The Growth Shift. And that's a wrap on another episode of The Growth Shift. If this conversation sparked something for you, whether it's a new perspective on failure, a strategy you want to try, or just the reminder that every setback can become a setup for something bigger, hit that subscribe button and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Remember, the leaders who thrive aren't the ones who avoid change. They're the ones who shift strategically through it. If you're ready to build the systems that help you grow without the chaos, head over to valentix.io. We help businesses like yours scale smarter, not harder. I'm David Zylstra, and I'll see you in the next shift.